already know you live in your head. You know your triggers, the patterns, the things you just can't stop ruminating about. You can probably explain your own psychology better than most people. And none of that stopped you from lying awake last night, replaying a conversation that ended 6 hours ago, trying to figure out what one sentence really meant. If understanding was the fix, you'd have been done with this years ago. Here's what's happening underneath it. At some point, you learned that thinking hard enough about a problem could potentially keep it from catching you off guard or leading to the worst possible outcome. If you looked at it from every angle, prepared for every outcome, rehearsed every version of the conversation, you couldn't be surprised. And being caught off guard for you was never just inconvenient, it felt dangerous. So your mind built a system. Every uncertain moment runs through it. What could go wrong, what it means, what you should have said instead. The system feels like problem solving. It's a feeling problem dressed up as a thinking problem, doing its best to manage something it was never built to resolve. I want to be specific about what this video is and isn't, because if you've done any work on yourself, you've heard a dozen versions of turn down the noise or just breathe through it. You don't need another one. More coping skills might provide temporary relief, but they aren't going to address the root. You're already insightful and self-aware. The gap isn't between you and understanding, it's between understanding and relief. You can know precisely why the loop starts and still not know how to stop being inside it at 11 p.m. That gap has a name, and I'll get into it in a second, because it's the difference between managing this pattern for another decade and permanently loosening its grip. But first, I want you to see this pattern in someone else, because it's easier to catch there before you catch it in yourself. So here's a client story. I'll call her Elena. If you met her, anxious probably wouldn't be the first word that came to mind. Elena is the person everyone counts on. She remembers the reservation time, brings the thing everyone else forgot, and somehow stays level-headed when plans fall apart. She's warm, easygoing, good in a crowd. When everyone else starts spinning, Elena is usually the calm one. A few weeks ago, she was walking her dog with her friend Jessie, something they do most Sunday mornings. They were talking about nothing in particular when Elena mentioned that since she'd recently moved, she was thinking about switching to a gym closer to her new place. Jessie paused. It wasn't a long pause, maybe 2 seconds. "Oh, okay," she said. "That makes sense." Then they kept walking. Jessie moved on, but Elena didn't. Almost immediately, her mind went back to those 2 seconds. Why did she hesitate? She replayed the way Jessie had said okay. She thought about their last few conversations. Had Elena said something that bothered her? Had there been other moments she'd missed? Maybe Jessie had been a little more distant lately. Maybe she was pulling away. Maybe something about their friendship had changed, and Elena was somehow the last person to realize it. By the time they said goodbye that morning, Elena had a handful of possibilities. By dinner, she had a story. And for the next several days, she lived inside that story. She rehearsed what she might say if Jessie brought something up. She imagined the conversation they'd have if there really was a problem. She went back through old interactions, looking for evidence she'd overlooked. From the outside, though, nothing seemed different. Elena went to work, she answered texts, she laughed with people, she got things done. No one looking at her would have thought she's anxious. The following week, Elena finally mentioned it to Jessie. Jessie stared at her, confused. She had no idea what Elena was talking about. The pause on their walk, Jessie had simply started thinking about her own gym schedule. That was it. There hadn't been a hidden message, she wasn't upset, their friendship hadn't changed. Elena had spent nearly a week preparing herself for something that had never happened. And that's part of what made this pattern so difficult for her to recognize. Her anxiety didn't look the way she'd always imagined anxiety was supposed to look. She wasn't visibly panicked. She didn't avoid people or fall apart under pressure. She was often the most composed person in the room. Her anxiety happened out of view. It happened during the hours she spent rehearsing a conversation that would probably never occur, in the meaning she assigned to a slightly different tone of voice, in the mental review after an ordinary interaction, in the instinct to notice the smallest shift in another person and immediately start trying to figure out what it meant and whether she needed to do something about it. To everyone else, Elena looked calm. Inside, she was constantly gathering information, anticipating what might go wrong, and preparing herself before it could. And if Elena's inner world sounds familiar, there may be a reason. What looks like overthinking now may have started as something much more useful, a strategy. Pay close attention, notice the shift, read the room, think ahead, be prepared. At some point, that strategy may have really worked. The problem is that your mind can keep running an old strategy long after it stops needing to protect you. Now, this pattern rarely shows up as one big spiral. It usually shows up in smaller, more constant ways. Researching a decision that genuinely has no wrong answer. 3 restaurants, 2 job offers, a paint color. until the research itself becomes the point. Because as long as you're still gathering information, you haven't had to commit to anything that could turn out wrong. Rehearsing a hard conversation a dozen different ways before you have it. Building responses to reactions the other person hasn't even had yet. Replaying a normal interaction afterward, combing it for evidence you said too much, too little, or the wrong thing entirely, even after the other person has clearly moved on. None of these look like a crisis from the outside. They look like being thorough. That's exactly why the pattern is so hard to interrupt. It's dressed as a strength. And as isolated incidents, they may be no big deal. But when this happens multiple times throughout the day, the toll it takes on your mental and emotional energy is no joke. The reason understanding your anxiety hasn't resolved it is that overthinking was never really about solving problems. It was about avoiding the discomfort of not knowing what happens next. Underneath the loop is something your subconscious picked up a long time ago. If I think about this enough, I can keep it from surprising me. For a lot of high achievers, that pattern formed early, often in homes where love or approval felt conditional, where staying one step ahead of a situation or a person's mood kept you out of trouble. Analysis became your version of control. And control, for a kid who didn't have much of it, became a self-preservation strategy. The trouble is that strategy never came with an off switch. It's still running the same code it ran when you were 7, just applied to performance reviews and text messages instead of a parent's mood. Your subconscious doesn't store it as a fact you can argue with. It stores it as something you feel. A tight chest, a knot in your stomach, tension in your jaw. You can't think your way out of a pattern that thinking never really installed in the first place. Understanding why you do this and feeling free to do something different, those are two separate things. Knowing the reason gets you partway there. Closing the rest of that gap takes more than insight. This isn't a case of shutting off the analytical part of you. That part has probably contributed to your success. The issue is asking it to do a job it was never built to finish, which is making you feel okay before anything's been resolved. So what do you do with this? Not a new mental trick, because you've tried enough of those already. Something smaller. Next time you notice a loop starting, the replaying, the rehearsing, the researching that stopped being useful, pause and name it out loud or in your head. This is the loop starting again. And before you let the thinking take over, give yourself 5 seconds to notice what the uncertainty feels like in your body. A tight chest maybe, or a fast pulse, or a pull toward your phone. You're not trying to make the feeling go away. You're practicing staying with it a little longer than you normally would before you let your mind reach for a solution. That's the whole exercise. 5 uncomfortable seconds. It won't feel like relief the first time. It's not supposed to. You're starting to teach your nervous system that discomfort can be tolerated without being solved immediately, which is a different skill than trying to think your way to calm, which oftentimes exacerbates things. The second practice is for when you catch yourself mid-spiral over something that already happened. So ask yourself one question. What am I trying to prevent right now? Not what happened, what you're trying to prevent by continuing to think about it. Most of the time, the honest answer is something like being caught off guard by someone's anger, or being blindsided by someone's disappointment in me. Naming that takes the loop out of disguise. It's no longer random overthinking. It's a specific, understandable attempt to protect yourself from something that already happened, likely several times over the course of your life. You can respect that attempt without needing to keep controlling it by overthinking. None of this means you need to stop being someone who thinks things through carefully. That part of you has served you well, and it isn't going anywhere. What changes is the job you're asking it to do. Thinking can prepare you for a conversation. It can't make an uncertain outcome certain, and it can't make another person's reaction predictable. It was never going to be able to give you the feeling of okayness you've been trying to think your way toward. That feeling comes from somewhere else, from practicing the ability to stay present with the not knowing a little longer each time, until not knowing stops feeling like an emergency. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. Stop asking, why am I like this? Start asking what you learned about your worth or connection to others, and about what made this pattern necessary in order to feel okay. And by okay, I mean in control. Your patterns make sense once you can see where they came from. And once you can see that, you can start to change them. If this is a pattern you recognize in yourself, I go deeper into where these beliefs come from and how they take hold in my book Unpacked: How to Detach from the Subconscious Beliefs That Are Sabotaging Your Life. You can download the free first chapter using the link in the description. And if you want to keep exploring this, I'd love to hear in the comments what came up for you.